Hello. Jason asks some questions about Maniac Mansion. Jason says, tell me a little bit about how you came to be involved with a Nintendo port of Maniac Mansion, which was the first Nintendo cartridge produced by Lucasfilm Games. What was your relationship with the original game or with the studio prior to that? I don't remember if I had any relationship to the studio particularly. I might have done. Was that my first LucasArts game? It might have been. My relationship was with David Warhol, who is an old pal of mine from back in the day. Anybody who hears my origin story knows that he had been my brother's roommate in college, and he was the person who introduced me to video game music gigging. He was my connection to get into in television games, and that's another story. But the main thing was he called me up and he said, "Hey, I need you to do some music. These are the characters that I'd like you to write a little bit of music for. Just a little theme song, just a little 30-second looper or whatever the duration was," and that was how it came down. So no relationship to the original game or with the studio prior to that that I can remember. The original PC version. Then back to Jason. The original I got to give him a voice. The original PC version of Maniac Mansion contains little music beyond the theme song by Chris Grigg and David Lawrence. Chris Grigg, what a guy! I love that guy. I didn't know he worked on that game. Chris Grigg was in the band Negative Land. And he's a pal. It isn't common for NES games to be that quiet, so I'm curious if giving the console release wall-to-wall music was a mandate, or if this was an elaboration you guys came up with yourselves. I was not in the loop. Dave Warhol called me up and said, "These are the things we need," and I'll dig around in my file drawer and see if I can't find the contract for that, so you can kind of see what the list looked like. Then it says here from Jason, once a tune is composed, how exactly does one go about implementing music into a Nintendo game circa 1990? What kind of tools were used? I have to imagine that a game composer in those days, when everything was closer to the metal, almost had to be a programmer of sorts themselves. Can you walk me through the process? Yes, I can. I was right at the point where people started using MIDI, and I was part of the force that was encouraging people to use MIDI. So I was not that programmer guy. David Warhol was the programmer guy, and I even believe that one of the reasons that he got these gigs, other than being a great guy and in the community, he came up with tools that allowed him to sort of crack through the code of how do you program for Nintendo, because evidently the tools that American developers got weren't quite up to snuff, and he was able to develop his own tools to insert music into Nintendo. And I can't remember if he automatically converted the MIDI into Nintendo formats. He definitely created the tones, and he either automatically converted our MIDI files or tweaked the MIDI files and then automatically converted them, or he might have even done what people used to do just before we used MIDI and translate that stuff into quarter notes and eighth notes, bursts of play the oscillator for this duration at this time in code. But he was a good tool maker, so that was his shtick. And he was also particularly well loved for his tones. So when you hear the echo tone, he loved to do that. It ate up at one of the oscillators, so if it was going to echo, he would only echo. He'd do the echo in a spot where I wasn't using all, two boops, the beep, and a pth. If I was just using a boop and a beep, then he would use the other beep as the echo. Likewise, he had a chorus effect where he would put one oscillator slightly out of tune from the other, so you'd hear one note, but it was two notes actually playing at the same time, slightly out of tune with each other, and make this chorusy sound. So he had little favorite tunes, like the one that kind of goes up at the end when the note's over. So that's what he had some justifiable pride in. And then it goes on. Oh, and walk you through the process. I used an MT32 as my reference, and I made sure that Dave Warhol had an MT32, which was kind of an elaborate, like it wasn't quite a sound card, but it was a sound card. No, it wasn't a sound card yet. It was just a multi-timbral device that people used for producing music. It didn't become a sound card until Loom and Wing Commander and some King's Quest, what's that, Sierra Online game, started using MT32 and it became an accessory for computers. But before that, it was kind of like, no, it's for musicians to be able to use one box to act as several synthesizers. So I had been using that MT32 to make music for music teachers, karaoke tunes so that their students could learn a hit tune. Or I would create backing tracks for people who had original tunes that they'd written. So I was just using an MT32. I made sure Dave Warhol had one, I had one. I would write my tune using a MIDI only digital audio workstation, just MIDI. I used Mark of the Unicorn Performer. And then I would export it as a MIDI file and I would modem that to Dave Warhol. I think by then we were up to 600 baud, 1200 baud. Just very slow modem. It took a while to send a MIDI file over the telephone lines. But that's how we would do it, and you'd probably be interested in what that looks like. You call up on the telephone and then you start the computer sending, and the computer is hooked into the modem, which then goes into the telephone line, and then you hang up the telephone. It's kind of like sending a fax. And you hear this, and that's the computers talking to each other. Is that exciting? Maybe it is. Is that nerdy? Maybe it is. So let's see. That's walking you through the process. And then he would call back and say, that was amazing. Actually, it's also important that he would send some really cool, inspirational ideas for how to do the tunes, such as, let's make this one a little bit more, he always urged me towards the Jetsons theme song and Rocky and Bullwinkle. He liked those accented wrong notes, the appoggiaturas, going outside the scale a little bit. He liked that almost atonal stuff. So I really appreciate him encouraging me to fly my freak flag. It says here, I like the conceit of the character themes being diegetic, with each of the kids possessing a portable CD player, quite the luxury at the time, as their default inventory item loaded with a song that fits their personality. Whose idea was this? No idea. Yourself, David Govett, Dave Hayes, and Dave Warhol of Real Time Associates are the credited composers of the dozen tracks that are acknowledged in the end credits. How did this collaboration come about, and how did you distribute the workload amongst yourselves? Dave Warhol picked which ones me and my team were supposed to do. My team, I think I was just starting to work with Dave Govett. I didn't quite have Team Fat at the time yet. So Dave Govett was my first composer that I was working with as Team Fat. And I just split the work with him. I picked which tunes I wanted to do, and I gave him the other ones. Maybe we discussed, because he really liked the idea of doing the robot-y one, which was, I think, based on the Nerd something. It was based on the song that they play at the end of the movie Revenge of the Nerds. Hopefully it wasn't too close to that. I would not like to get sued at this point. Those end credits attribute you to the themes for Razor. Yes. No, never, well, maybe, sure, okay. Putatively credited to The Void. Jeff, Surf Face, putatively credited to Goofy Feet, and the Edison family theme. Could you talk a little bit about each of those tracks and any influences that might have been at play? Yes. No, never, no, well, maybe someday. That was purely punk, and my punk repertoire, while I was in Los Angeles playing at the clubs in 1981, so I was exposed to that, but really I kind of stuck to God Save the Queen. It's mostly my version of Sex Pistols. That's why you hear and that. That's supposed to be somebody. That's supposed to be somebody yelling. I guess it's a little bit Ramones. But it's supposed to be like "God Save the Queen," da 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 da, fascist regime. That one note melody that's just shouted. Surf Face. I cannot remember which. There's a song by the Astronauts. Who was the Astronauts were like my biggest influence beside the Beatles when I was growing up. They're a surf band, and there's one of theirs that I really took all the chords from and then shuffled them around and put them back together into my own tune. But that's definitely surf music, and if you if you look around, you can find Team Fat and me playing that tune actually as a surf band because that was something that we liked to do. Uh, and the Edison family theme, I cannot remember how it goes right now, but you know what? I think that there was a I think that there was a TV theme that went bum 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 bum, ba 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 ba, ba 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 ba, do 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 do. And you know what? I think the name of the TV show was The Mothers-in-Law. Um, and I think that was one that I drew from for that. If I'm thinking of the right tune. But I think that it came from, I think that since it was a family theme, I was looking for like a 60s sitcom theme to sound like. But, a monster ish family. Let's see. You are also responsible for an unused track you've dubbed Evil Dr. Fred. Was this an alternate of the Edison theme, or was it intended for another purpose? Any memory of why it wasn't used? I have no idea why it wasn't used. I was very proud of that tune. It's in the demo cassette that I sent out around then. I sent out the world's first demo tape for video games, for getting video games gigs. It was a cassette. The assignment was that there was a character, the evil Dr. Fred, and that was about it. So I tried to write a tune that would suit an evil Dr. Fred. I mean, come on, how hard could that be? So it's got laughter in it, like ah ha 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 ha. Ha. So it's got that passage in it. If you listen to it, you'll hear it. Um, but I think Dave Warhol used to like how if he would say, I want something that sounds like penguins eating hamburgers on the moon, I could write a tune and he'd go, hey, well, that sounds like some animal. It's penguins and they're eating something. Oh, hamburgers. Yeah. And it's on some planet or maybe it's a satellite. So I was just kind of good at that, I guess, or at least Dave thought I was. Um, and all he really had to tell me was it's for Evil Dr. Fred. If you have a character read the broken record in the music room, it is revealed to be the Loom soundtrack album. And playing it will. Oh, I did have a relationship with LucasArts. Brian Moriarty had asked me to do the music for Loom. That was my first LucasArts game. Um, and Brian Moriarty was pals with Dave Warhol, but I had already been working with Dave Warhol before that. So let's see. It's revealed to be the Loom soundtrack album, and playing it will get you the first few notes of the Crystal Guard music track from that game. The reference is exclusive to the NES version, and since Loom was in production around the same time, and I know you were involved with that project as well, I'm curious if you were responsible for this little in-joke. No. Similarly, the first four notes of the Raiders March are heard when calling up the Meteor Police on the shortwave radio. Sweet. Any other recollections from this project that stand out for you? Um, I am really pleased with that surf tune, and I'm really pleased with what I wrote, and I think that this was very early in working with Dave Govett, and he just totally came through for me. And I just remember feeling like, man, I'm taking a risk working with this guy. Um, because I just really didn't. I just like he was in the neighborhood. He came by to visit. I said, go ahead and write some stuff. And he just, every time he'd get hold of something, it'd just be great. And then it'd be great again and be great again. So I just feel like the universe just really looked out for me and handed me a beautiful, beautiful composer and friend, and it got me over uh, just not trusting. It really was one of the boons of my life to get to work with uh, Dave Govett and to benefit from being associated with his music. And I feel the same way about Dave Warhol, who was a great musician, who is a great musician in his own right, but really gave me a chance. And Brian Moriarty, picking out those tunes from Swan Lake to put into Loom, I just really stood on the shoulders of giants. What's the legacy of this gig in the context of your body of work? Is it something you get asked about with any frequency, or do you see it as more of an interesting footnote in a lengthy career? It's in the top six. I get asked about it a good deal, and I'm very proud of it. Although I do get confused because people say things like Day of the Tentacle, and I can't remember if that's what I worked on or not. People are very interested in the inner workings of LucasArts, but I can only answer those through hearsay. Although I did become very good friends with the Three Stooges, who are the three great composers for LucasArts, Michael Land, Clint Bajakian, and Peter McConnell. We actually used to go out. They would invite me out to visit them, and they just treated me like a king. I remember one time when we went. Now this is a little different these days to think of it, but they invited me out. They thought of me as the Texas guy, and so they invited me to come out, work on some things with them, and go out shooting at the gun range, which some of them did like under total objection. It's like, I don't do this, but I'm doing it for you, fat man. And then drinking single malt whiskey. And of course, I had to be edgy, and I said, well, why would you do it in that order? You got it all wrong. So that's my fake Texas attitude. Let's see. And Maniac Mansion is one of my all-time favorite games. Yeah. And the NES port remains one of the most standout console ports of a computer game that I can think of, with the soundtrack playing a major role in why. Thank you for talking with me about it. I'm very, very pleased to talk to you about it. Thank you for asking me about it. And I hope that this is what you need. And for all you people who like Maniac Mansion, thank you for liking it. And thank you for not turning the sound down. Keep on rocking.